I don't know when I am free. In myself I am free. I need nothing, I am free. In myself I am free. I need no one, I am free. In myself I am free. In myself I am free. In myself I am free. I am free, I am free. In myself I am free. I am totally free. In myself I am free. I own nothing, I am free. In myself I am free. I own no one, I am free. In myself I am free. I need nothing, I am free. In myself I am free. I need no one, I am free. In myself I am free. In myself I am free. I am free. I am free, I am free. In myself I am free. I am joyful, ever free. In myself I am free. I am blissful, ever free. In myself I am free. I am nameless, ever free. In myself I am free. I am formless, ever free. In myself I am free. I own nothing, I am free. In myself I am free. I own no one, I am free. In myself I am free. I need nothing, I am free. In myself I am free. I need no one, I am free. In myself I am free. In myself I am free. In myself I am free. I am free, I am free. In myself I am free. I am joyful, ever free. In myself I am free. I am blissful, ever free. In myself I am free. I am nameless, ever free. In myself I am free. I am formless, ever free. In myself I am free. I own nothing, I am free. In myself I am free. I own no one, I am free. In myself I am free. I need nothing, I am free. In myself I am free. I need no one, I am free. In myself I am free. In myself I am free. In myself I am free. I am free, I am free. In myself I am free. I am joyful, ever free. In myself I am free. I am blissful, ever free. In myself I am free. I am nameless, ever free. In myself I am free. I am formless, ever free. In myself I am free. I am nameless, ever free. In myself I am free. I am formless, ever free. In myself I am free. I own nothing, I am free. In myself I am free. I own no one, I am free. In myself I am free. I need nothing, I am free. In myself I am free. I need no one, I am free. In myself I am free. In myself I am free. In myself I am free. I am free, ever free. In myself I am free. I am joyful, ever free. In myself I am free. I am blissful, ever free. In myself I am free. I am nameless, ever free. In myself I am free. I am formless, ever free. In myself I am free. I am nameless, ever free. In myself I am free. I am formless, ever free. In myself I am free. I am nameless, ever free. In myself I am free. I am formless, ever free. In myself I am free. Let's just have a moment of silence, just feeling the presence of God and God. And again, praying, fresh and flow. Okay, why don't you tell me what that verse is?
So, Asha, I couldn't hear what you said because I had to turn my speaker down. So, what did you say?
I just asked if the question in the chat
Yeah.
box.
Okay. Yeah. And I hope the person, yeah, I'm sure they're still on. About a half hour ago. So, here we'll start this segment. It says, how essential is fasting 1 day per week? Master mentions it often.
Well, this is the true teaching is individual. Every master said that you had to do 1% of what he taught in order to be successful on the spiritual path. I always quoted that as 10%, but it turns out that it's 1%. So, but he said everyone does a different 1%. And that's why he had to teach so much. So, everybody who fasts once a week, and I know many people who do, and Jyotish and David were recently talking about it, say that it's just absolutely life changing and everyone should do it. I don't. I never have. It's not that I don't think that one applies to me. It's that I'm just not very good at fasting. It's just not one of the things that I do. And that's how I live with it. So it's hard to answer that question. But, and I'll put it from this way, from the age of 18, my first introduction to self-realization included also hatha yoga and physical yoga and diet and fasting and things like that. From the age of 18, I have been extremely conscientious about my health. Water, food, vegetarianism, exercise, fresh air, everything. I mean, really extreme. No, excuse me, that's not really extreme, but I've been just really conscientious about it. It's been effortless to be so. Someone asks, how do you become a vegetarian? I don't know, you just do. You do. But it's not a big discipline for me to do that. Fasting I don't enjoy, but it's not a big discipline for me to eat healthy and eat well. It would be a tapasya for me not to do that. So I thought at one point, let me think what I was going to say, just something about, and I've enjoyed very good health, but it crossed my mind self-evidently, I must have had many lives of ill health, because as soon as I was old enough to think about it, taking care of my body was just a huge and first priority. And so the obvious balancing karma is that I didn't take care of my body for many incarnations. I suffered the consequences. And as a result, I'm just aware, don't do that. So, how important it is for a person to fast depends on whether or not um, there's an inclination toward gluttony that needs to be disciplined. There's an inclination toward not paying attention to health laws that needs to be focused on. There's a sense that this is a good place for me to practice self-discipline, and so that's why it's just how you respond, how important it that the benefits for health are self-evident because that's science. How important that is for you depends on your karma, so you just have to think it through on your own. And we can't do everything, and one of the ways that we make ourselves crazy on the spiritual path, which is, I'm actually going to take the question, one of the ones that I received in the mail in just a moment. One of the ways we make ourselves crazy on the spiritual path is we set up the wrong model for ourselves. And then we always get to fail because we've set up a model that we'll never be able to attain, or that isn't even actually our model. It's the wrong model. And then we never match it. And so we always get to be unhappy. And as Swami said to me, that's our plan, that's not God's. So if that question is, I do it and I'm proud of it, or I'm thinking of it, how important is it, or I don't do it and I feel guilty all the time, it depends on where the question is coming from. One of my friends many years ago, she has still a fiery temperament, and she was being particularly fiery, and I became the designated spokesperson for all of her friends to try to hose her down a little because she was driving us crazy. And I said, what's wrong with you? Why are you so edgy and mean all the time. And she said, "Oh, my meditations are just terrible." She says, "They're just terrible. I'm having so much trouble meditating." I laughed again. You take the same situation and you can take it from any side. I laughed and I said, "Oh, when my meditations are terrible, all I have left is being nice. I try to be really, really nice because if I'm messing up in one area, I try to make it better in the areas that I have some control over, instead of using failure in one place to just dive down into the mud and not come out of it. Because it's all equally true. There's always something good about us, but but the devil, and I'll just use that word, the devil tells us to think about what's wrong with us. Now I'll go because this is about examples from the life of Swami Kriyananda. I mean, he knew our faults more than anyone, and he never. I mean, he rarely referred to them, very rarely. And when he would actually correct you, it would always be in just exactly the right way, and so that you would feel encouraged instead of discouraged. And he just never concentrated on our flaws. He always concentrated on our strengths. There was one person in the community who was so difficult to get along with, but they were much nicer to Swamiji than they were to everyone else. Now, some of us were small-minded enough to think that that was hypocrisy, because but Swami looked at just the opposite. Well, he said, if they can be nice to me, that means they have it in them to be nice. And so he just took it, he just reversed it, completely reversed it. And so that his example of how he treated us was actually an example of how not only we should treat others, but we should also treat ourselves. Which is, there's lots that's wrong with me, but what's the point? What's important is what's good about me. And that's when I was talking earlier about Dayamata and all of that. Yeah, sure, they made mistakes. But what matters is the goodness that's our dominant quality. Because see, the other part of it is error is finite, goodness is infinite. Error is temporary, goodness is eternal. So if I'm only thinking about my error, I'm deliberately concentrating continuously on that which is just a dream. If I concentrate on my goodness, then I'm always concentrating on that which is true. I think if there's just one single thought to take away from this gathering this morning, watch your mind. Watch what it's doing. And and Swamiji always trained us to move with our strengths and don't worry about your weaknesses. Because if you move with your strengths, then gradually the good karma you get from moving with your strengths will just outdistance your weaknesses. I always thought of my life, especially in those first 10 years, which were, as I referred to, which were amazing in retrospect. Um, I always thought of myself as two hot rods in a drag race. I mean, is that even an image that people know about these days? But two hot rods in a drag race, they start out right next to each other and they just race along and they're just side by side. And then, especially if it's in a movie, eventually one of them just streaks out ahead. So I always just saw my bad qualities and my good qualities. They were just side by side and both of them had the accelerator to the floor. But I knew that Master's foot on the accelerator was heavier than mine on the wrong side. And that if I just kept pushing with what was good, eventually, Swami once said to me about my faults, that just persevere and in relatively short order, it will straighten itself out. I always wanted to know, relative to what, sir? My incarnation, this month, eternity? What are we talking about? But he was very careful with words, and I've held to in relatively short order. So the two hot rods are just pushing. So which one do you want to, which one do you want to ride in? They're both going to run. And the more we concentrate on what's wrong with us, guess what our mind is filled with all the time? I mean, it's a no-brainer, but it's just as true. So it's vitally important. And so this was I got a question that was about page 469 of the book. I'm just saying that so the person who wrote it will know. And Swami just says quite simply, nothing is more important than our quest for God. He was making a corrective to the community. Even when you are working, feel that God is working through you, using your hands, guiding your feet, etc. Ask God, what do you want from me? And the person says, even after all these years of training, it's hard to keep this in mind. But I actually realized that part of sometimes when we think we're not succeeding is that we have the wrong image in our mind of what success looks like. This is what I was saying. Sometimes we have a wrong model. And so no matter how hard we try, we can never meet the model that we've presented because it's a false teaching. When people in the 70s and the 80s, when people were really into various new thought things, and a lot of them had to do with how you could heal yourself with right attitude and all this stuff that you could do. And people would come to me, I would call them refugees from the new age, because they had tried these affirmation techniques. And it generally had to do with physical healing or manifesting money or attracting the right life partner. And they would practice them as best they could. And they were still sick and they were still single and they were still poor. And then the natural conclusion would be that there was something wrong with them because of the whole way that that was presented. I said, no, actually, it's not a false teaching. It's just an incomplete teaching because it doesn't take into account reincarnation and it doesn't take into account karma and it doesn't take into account that what you think is best for you may not actually be best for you and that we are part of a greater reality and God is in charge. So the same thing is true that if we are sincere and we constantly seem to fail, the probability, I would say the 99.9% probability, is that we're working with false definitions of success and failure, and that we're too external in the way we're thinking about it. Now, this particular comment of Swami's, feel God is working through you, remember that God is always with you. So, see, now I go back to the example of Swamiji, because he was so natural in the way he moved through life. I mean, now I'm speaking especially in the first. I say I will exclude the last few years of his life. In the last few years of his life, essentially his work was done, and I mean by that his external work was done, and essentially he just fell back into a state of bliss, and he just didn't have to strive anymore. That's why I start the book with a conversation from 2011 when people asked me if I thought Swamiji had changed in the years that I'd known him. And I said I felt his consciousness was always the same, but the way he presented himself was very different. And he said, yes, that's the truth. Because I would ask Swamiji, can I say this? Sometimes he would say, no, you can't, because he didn't want it said while he was living. Like the biggest example of that was that he took on karma for other people and for other situations, and that the illnesses of his body were not his own karma. He wouldn't let me say that until after he died, and then I was allowed to. But what it looks like to remember that God is flowing through you, yes, it's wonderful if we go into a state of bliss and we're, as Meister Eckhart said, I move my hand and Christ moves, who is my hand. I mean, what could be more glorious than that? But you don't get a lot of work done as a rule like that. And in the life of both Swami Kriyananda and Swami Vivekananda, Vivekananda was the most notable, the most famous disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, who was an avatar who died just before Master was born. And Vivekananda was a great soul. And early on in his relationship with his guru Ramakrishna, Ramakrishna touched him and put him into a state of samadhi in which everything about the world disappeared and all he saw was God. And Vivekananda and his guru celebrated together in that state of consciousness.
Then his guru brought him out of it and said, I don't even know if he, maybe even there was something he saw. I have the key to that state of consciousness for you, and I'm putting it in my pocket. And I'm not going to give that key back to you until you've done what you need to do in this world. Because if you could go into that state of consciousness, you wouldn't do anything in this world. And Swamiji himself commented on many occasions that Master said to him, and this is, Master said that, told Swami that he was, and I don't know how to think about this, but this is what he said, that he was already self realized. But Swamiji himself felt that the experiences were being withheld from him, because if he could just sit in meditation and go into samadhi, he would never do anything else. And he just had he had all these things he had to do. So it was, that option was not available to him. Seclusion was not available to him. Being a hermit was not available to him. Sitting in samadhi was not available to him, because otherwise he would have just turned his back on this world and never paid any attention. And that wasn't his destiny. He needed to set an example for us. So we have in our mind that somehow being in tune with God, even communing with God, has this I'm going to use the word romantic, has this romantic quality to it. And every once in a while, that actually does happen. But when it does happen, the motivation to do anything else is pretty close to zero, at least in me. And it doesn't happen that often. So most of the time I'm moving around doing stuff. And in my case, and in most of our cases, we have to be compelled to action because we have a lot of unfinished karma. We're just not free enough to work out that karma in a constant state of awareness with God. The constant state of awareness of God will come to us, but only when this compelling outward restless karma is done, and preferably when we use that compelling outward restlessness in sattvic ways that serve, then the hot rod of our good karma will get ahead of the hot rod of our bad karma. So coming back precisely, and this is again, I'm doing a little reverse engineering here. It's a feeling of moving. It's in order to actually do something, you have to be grounded in this world in order to do it. But the awareness that God is moving my hand, that God is acting through me, is there. But it's in, why am I doing this? And what am I doing? It's not necessarily the feeling that Christ is picking up my hand and putting it over here. It's that why am I picking up my hand and putting it over here? Because I'm here to serve God. I had a very interesting experience, which it just, again, this is for me, but I was sitting in my living room and there's a big picture of Master on the wall. And I just looked at the picture and I just realized I only came to this world for God realization. Now, that does not mean that I'm a Jivan Mukta or that I have no other desires. But the captain of my ship is God realization. And there's a lot of other crew members. And sometimes we jump off into the water and just swim along on the side before we get back on. And all of that is true. But the captain of the ship is still God realization. And, we're going there as fast as we can. So, even when you are working, feel that God is working through you. It isn't necessarily, and again, I use the romantic feeling that you actually are conscious of not being alone, but you're also not really thinking about yourself either. I would say you're thinking about what's flowing through you. And what is flowing through you except the inspiration from God? And that's how Swami worked. You see, he was perfectly natural and he was perfectly practical in the way he did things. So that's I'm working through from what he means. Yes, Supriya.
So, for this little mind to process what I've just heard, does this sound a part of it? It's two things. Number one is it's the attitude of the mind behind as much as possible. It's just the attitude of the mind behind the meditating, the working, the praying, the sleeping, the attitude. And the second part is, since usually it's not this blissful samadhi state, I wish, since it's not, the good thing that my mind says is that it makes my heart yearn even more for, not for samadhi, not for the feeling good, but for God.
That's one. That's a very good way to put it.
That,
Here's another way, which is the simple phrase, self forgetfulness is to remember God, because we're always conscious. I mean, I'm not downplaying japa, devotion, the sense of master with you. I'm talking about one aspect of it. But egoic self-consciousness is the opposite of God realization. Okay. And now I'm not, and tamasic sleep is, or just tamasic dullness, lack of awareness, taking a holiday from everything. Well, let's take that one off the table. Let's say the only two we're working with is self-consciousness, self-awareness, thinking about me, what I'm doing, whether I want to do it or not, whether I like it, whether I'm doing it well, all of this, or just self-forgetfulness in the flow of energy. Well, so self-forgetfulness in the flow of energy is God reminding or God remembering, especially if what we're doing is serviceful and sattvic. But even a leaf, even picking up a leaf off the ground with complete devotion, if we're doing it out of love for God, is also a great act. But we're doing it out of love for God. So that's where I look at my life and I think I can do everything out of love for God. I'm cooking, but I'm cooking healthy, good food to keep my body well. I'm conducting the seminar. I'm doing a broadcast in the morning. I'm lying on my bed reading an interesting book about Edgar Cayce, which I happen to be doing right now. And it's like I'm reading about Edgar Cayce because he loved God and he was so interesting, and everything I'm hearing is helping me. So these are all the ways in which God is moving me, and that I am working with and as an instrument of. Some of them are more dramatically wonderful. When I was writing Light Bearer, that was an incredibly grace-filled period in which I was much closer to just really feeling the divine flowing through me. But that's over. So now I'm doing something else. So again, every answer to every question about spiritual life should make you feel happier and more loved by God. And if it doesn't, it's the wrong answer. And that's just as simple. A mathematician told me, if he was an atheist who became a believer when he got seriously into math, because if the answer to the problem is not elegant, harmonious, and beautiful, it's not the right answer. And it occurred to him, if mathematics resolves that way, then life itself must also resolve. And atheism was neither elegant, harmonious, or beautiful. So if I think of myself in relationship to God and I get an answer that's not elegant, harmonious, and beautiful, it's just not the right answer. And whatever, you just have to keep finding where the edges of that are and then keep adjusting them. Even if the right answer is, well, I've done enough in this incarnation, I'm just going to kick back and enjoy the fruits of what I've done so far, and I'll pick it up again when I'm a kid. I mean, that's okay. No, don't go like that. You just, whatever it is, be happy. Be happy. It's very important. Susan, did you have a question, or Hugh? Or Susan first. Did you have a question, Susan? No. Okay. Okay, Hugh?
I just wanted to share, Ma, for those, if you're touched by this idea in this page in 469, that even when you're working, feel that God is working through you, that it just piggybacks so perfectly with Yotish's blog yesterday, A Touch of Light, where he talks about this very same concept, but beautifully shared in a dream that Master, that he had of Master, which he doesn't share completely the dream, but the teaching in that you sometimes feel like you rather just go into a long, deep meditation like the blissful ones that you had, instead of doing the work you're doing. But Jyotish is reminded that whatever we are doing now, especially if it's working towards God or whatever it is, with higher consciousness, is our dharma. And so we have to remember that we are still doing something as in that meditative state if we tune ourselves to God. And he closes it with Master's God, 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 where he talks about the same idea. So I just wanted to share that with the group. If you want to go a little deeper into that, and just read that yesterday's blog. It was so beautiful. And if you don't get a touch of light, sign up for it.
I also wanted to say, which what you're saying is valid, and Supriya, this is something for you to consider. And in my 9 a.m. broadcasts, which are available for free on my YouTube channel, I spent I don't know how many days on the 8 manifestations of God, and a more direct, an even more direct answer to the question that we were just talking about here is, what does it mean for God to flow through you? And the 8 manifestations of God, light, sound, calmness, love, peace, I won't name all 8 of them. When we are manifesting those qualities, we are manifesting the presence of God through us. And when we are aware of those qualities, that's what it is. See, this really is the point. What does it mean to feel God flowing through you? And so when we start with understanding what the 8 manifestations are, I will say it: love, joy, peace, calmness, energy, light, and sound. And then there's one more wisdom. And it's a fascinating study, and I'm so glad I can now say, go to the YouTube channel and look for it. It was somewhere in the last 4 months. Good luck finding it, but you'll be able to. Because when we, how does God manifest in this world? And the Sanatan Dharma says through those qualities. So if what is flowing through me is love, and I'm conscious that love is flowing through me, I am working with God flowing through me. If I'm conscious of joy flowing through me, if I'm calm, if I'm energetic, if I know that I'm behaving according to wisdom, that's what it is for God to flow through us. And that's what Jyotish was talking about. And that's how we make it practical. That's how we make God flowing through us practical. And so it's happening a lot more. And then we can tell when it's not. I'm angry with someone. I'm disharmonious. Well, sometimes disharmony happens, but I'm not calm in the face of disharmony. Because, the 8 manifestations do not include the word nice. We are not always nice because things happen in life. But even if we're calm in the face of great difficulty, I move my hand, and my hand is God, because I'm moving it as a manifestation of that energy. And it completely grounds the idea and makes it absolutely accessible. So it's exceedingly important. I'm glad I remembered that. So I will go on to something else. Several people asked me about leadership. And it's related to work and accomplishment. People ask me about leadership in different ways. I would say one of the major themes of this book I've written was Swami Kriyananda as a leader. So I spoke about one part of it, which is that he always emphasized our strengths and gave us both the opportunities and the encouragement to follow our strengths. And of course, do what we could to overcome our weaknesses. But what happens when we concentrate on our weaknesses is we become totally self-absorbed, and that is the opposite of God consciousness. When we concentrate on our strengths, then it's more likely that light, joy, calmness, love can flow through us. And so it's much more likely that we can feel the presence of God in those vibrations. And that's among the many reasons why he suggests that. But he was also, let me think how to say this. We can only accomplish in life as much as we can accomplish. And especially when we're doing something that involves other people. There's kind of 2 kinds of temperaments in the world, or this is an overstatement, but this is what I've observed. Personally, I am a creative artist type, which is I like my own ideas. And I like to have the opportunity to my medium, my favorite medium is my own ideas. You know, that's why I write, that's why I speak, because I like to be able to just bring what's coming to my mind. I like to be able to bring it to a focus, and I like in a simple way to be able to express it. I was talking to some friends about movie making, and one of my friends who has had experience in the professional movie world talked about what a frustrating medium it is for a creative artist because so many other people get involved. You can't really just do what you want to do. And until you get to the point where you're such a respected and powerful director, and even then, they won't necessarily do what you want to do. Now, friends of mine who were professional ballet dancers, and of course, that's a very short career, and he went into teaching, and he was it was very interesting what he said, I used to think the epitome of the most joyful experience in the world was dancing. He said, but now I've discovered it's helping somebody else to dance. And he didn't know that helping someone else to dance would be even more fulfilling than dancing himself. But he discovered another aspect of his nature and found that was true. Now, if you're leading something, the medium of your expression is other people's energy. And that's what's really tricky about it. Because if, as a leader, you think the medium of expression is your energy, you will always be frustrated. Unless you can be the kind of leader that Swamiji put me into, which is I have never had an administrative position. And he's never given me an administrative position. And even in all the years that I've been here in Palo Alto, it's always been a balanced team where I just got to do what I do, which is I got to be myself, which was helpful to people, obviously. But I didn't have to, I wasn't limited in my self expression by their capacity to express. But I've been surrounded by people who are really good leaders, who really know how to bring everybody else's energy in and then help direct that energy to make things happen. And then what will happen is only what will happen because it's God's will. It's not necessarily our abilities. We just, but whoever's in front of us, and I am good in this respect. Whoever is in front of us, we do the very best we can for them, and we do the best we can. I remember at a certain point when we were working here, and we wanted somebody to go to work at our East-West bookshop, and we invited this woman to go to work at East-West bookshop, and she wouldn't do it. And the person who was talking to her said, well, uh, if we paid you exactly what you're getting now with all the same benefits, would you go to work at East West Bookshop? No. And now the first inclination is to be annoyed. Why aren't you more dedicated? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you willing to help? But instead, I and those of us involved, we just pulled back and said, well, this is the reality we're dealing with. You know, we can't make a person be someone that they're not. And we have to listen to what is really important to them because it's their energy that has to make this happen. And if we're looking at the limits of their energy, then we have to redefine what's possible. We can't always be saying something is possible. If I'm writing a book, I can say what that book is going to be. And the only person who is involved in whether it is or isn't is me and Divine Mother and Swamiji. But if I'm trying to run a bookstore or make a community or run a church or something like that, and I can't do it all myself, then what can be done depends on who's there. And in an ashram, you can't advertise for talent. You can't just hire the most qualified person and put them in charge because the people are your project. And adjusting all those balances, which also comes to realizing many things. This is what God has sent me, and I'm not failing because I can't make more happen. This is just my magnetism. This is my learning curve. This is my family. This is what I'm supposed to do. And we can continue to be ambitious, but we have to be practical in our idealism. And Swamiji, all the time, I mean, countless times, it's just like people were always the limitation. And I was telling someone yesterday, one of the very, very few times I ever saw Swami actually express impatient frustration. He had been working on some project or another, and then some personal reality for a key person, and it was a very important personal reality, meant that that person was not going to be able to do certain things that they'd hoped to be able to do. And I was there for the whole cycle. So I was there when Swami was talking to the person, and totally sympathetic and supportive. And I'll use the phrase that Swami said to me: personal things are also very important. And so he said, of course you have to take care of this, and of course the implications are that we're not going to go forward in this way, and so on. Absolutely calm. And then after the person left, he said this: every time I think I'm going to get something started, something interferes. And then he was fine. But it was more like he wasn't mad at the person because they were just being themselves, but sigh, in this world, in this prison, the prison conditions are just tough. And so it's just not going to happen the way he thought it was going to happen because because the medium is other people's energy. Now that that there's a whole lot more that can be said, and I try to put it all through the book. Swami was always most concerned about our attitudes and our energy and our dharma, and he would never use someone if it wasn't in their spiritual best interest. As I wrote many times, and he always said, if something is very important and needs to be done, but there's no one available for whom it would be spiritually beneficial to do it, then we just won't do it. And in one very important thing, he'd worked very hard to get one aspect of the ministry. It was actually about music. He'd worked very hard to get the music ministry up to a certain point. And then there was a person involved in it who was behaving in an adharmic way. There was just no way around it. When Swami heard about it in the morning, he shut the whole department down in the afternoon. It was just as simple as that. It's no, we're not going to do it. And he was another one of those. He didn't express impatience in the same way, but he sighed. But this is it. This is the way life works, and we haven't failed. We've just brought as much success to the situation as is available to us, and now we have to go on. And what we have to do is we have to be exceedingly creative. See, that's what Swami showed us. We just, oh, well, that didn't work. Let's try this. When I asked him what the secret of prosperity was, he said creativity. And I didn't get it quite at first, so I had to ask him. He said the belief that there's always a solution, and if this isn't it, then it's that. And so if one sets one's mind that this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it, and these are the people who are going to do it with me, or for me, or alongside of me, and those conditions don't develop, then we have to be creative enough to say, okay, given what we do have, what can we do? And if we keep at it, that very attitude is magnetic. And if it doesn't end up looking like what we expect it to look like, Laurelwood didn't make it. In Laurelwood, I mean, you probably know that Laurelwood was this huge, fabulous project that I still can't believe it, but it didn't make it. And Ocean Song, which was before your time, which was this wonderful community we had by the ocean, near the ocean. It lasted for 7 years, but it was supposed to be donated property, and the man who promised it to us could never bring himself to donate it. And after 7 years, we just saw it was never going to happen. And we had a school, we put buildings up, we had a lot of people there. Savitri was there. She described it as the had the sweetest and best vibration of any place she ever lived. We just had to pack the trucks and come home. I mean, the community I live in now, Ananda, Palo Alto, I think we're going to make it, but we're also under siege at the moment. We've been threatened a couple of times with annihilation in the last couple of years. I think we're going to make it through, but we don't always make it. But that doesn't mean we failed. That just means we didn't make it, you know. Comments or thoughts on that one? Because that's a big one. You have to love people, and you have to see them in terms of, well, when I first moved to Ananda, Palo Alto, I'd been 16 years at Ananda Village. And we were pretty isolated. It was a pretty rarefied atmosphere there, much more even than it is now, because the bar was really high to be there, because especially the first 10 years, because there was nothing. I mean, I didn't think the bar was high. I loved having nothing. I think the bar is, how would I put it? I think having nothing is a lower bar because it's more fun. But I'm odd. I mean, actually, I'm going to pause and say, Asha, listen to yourself, because the threat to this community, I have not always been so easy about it. After 2 years of struggle with it, I'm at the point now where if it goes away, we'll just find another solution. So I'm feeling better. It's not going to go away on my watch if I can avoid it. I promise you that. But I've accepted. But in any case, it was a rarefied atmosphere. So I moved to this area. There was already a lovely center, small center that was going, and we just started building it up. But for a long time, I evaluated everybody who came in the door. My criteria was, are you a confirmed life member of the Ananda Sevaka order? It was like, and if you weren't, then a piece of my mind always considered you to be some kind of a second-class citizen. And that was not a very helpful attitude for me or for anyone. And it also made my life kind of lonely, as you can well imagine. As Swami said, if I expected perfection of my friends, I would be a very lonely man. That's how he put it. Which, see, the things that stick in your mind, just think about that. You don't ever have to have known Swami Kriyananda to have that phrase in your mind. And every time I fall into it, I think, well, do I want to have friends or do I want to be lonely? So I was just doing that. And then all of a sudden, I looked around. How dumb can I be? I don't think we even had a community at that point. I was just living in a rented house in the area. And I looked around and I thought, the choices are going to the bars on the weekend. I mean, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about 5-hour meditations every Saturday morning. We're talking about how much you drink. And it's not like the people who came in were all low consciousness, but I just flipped it. And really, I tried to not think about who people should be, but I actually tried to ask myself, who are they? That's like when that woman just wouldn't take the job because she did not want to close. She did not want to have to have the doors of Ananda slam behind her with her having no exit plan. Basically, she was very dedicated, and eventually actually did step all the way in. But at that time, she needed her job. She needed the freedom of it. She needed the hours off. Being full time in Ananda is a lot of pressure because you never get any time off, and she needed the time off. And then that was another thing I understood. So I started judging the people who came in the door or looking at them from the bottom up. And I don't mean that at all insulting. It was like, whoa, they come every Sunday. Look at that. They give us $10 a month, even though I know they're making $300,000 a year, but $10 a month. Look at that. Isn't that marvelous? And everything was a gift. And everything was more than not. And I realized that's Swami's attitude toward us. Everything is more than less. Everything that's given toward God. And of course, I know that the way Swami saw me, gradually taught me how to see myself, which was in terms of what was good. That's all. I laughed Swami he would often call a lot of us and ask us for advice. He would ask us for comments. He would give us his manuscripts and so on like that. And he was genuine. He was sincere in it. He was very sincere in it because he was not so arrogant as to think the only voice that could speak for God was him. I've been amused by this sometimes when I've tried to help people understand what they should do. And they're just sort of convinced that I have to get the answer in meditation or it's not a true answer. And I sometimes, if it's appropriate, I ask the question, do you think the only person God can speak through is you? I mean, is there any possibility that someone else could also, be the voice of God in your life? Why would you be the only one who can hear it? So Swamiji very seriously respected us. I tell a few stories in the book where he asked our advice on issues that were just so far beyond us to give advice. And later someone said, why did you turn that decision over to others? He said, I didn't turn it over. He said, I intuitively felt what was right, but I wanted to see if any of you could come up with an objection that hadn't occurred to me. So it was a genuinely respectful question. But also, of course, it took me many years to realize, oh, he's asking me for my sake. He did it so skillfully and so sincerely, I thought it was only for him. But it was also for me, so that he would, and it was genuine, so that I would understand that he was really my friend. He wasn't just tolerating me, and he wasn't just a superior being who was in charge. There's the phrase spiritual director, which has come into vogue in the context of Ananda, and I respect it. It's an important phrase, and it means a lot. But I also, the more Ananda has become formalized, the less I like it. This is why I think the bar is lower when there's nothing there. Because what I've seen at Ananda is that people lead by magnetism, not by position. And magnetism is created when people will take responsibility with humility and love. And anybody who takes responsibility with humility and love creates magnetism. And that's the magnetism then that makes things happen. And if we have to refer to position in order to get cooperation, then we need to rethink it. And I mean, I know we all are tempted at times to say, well, I'm in charge. And the only way that's ever useful, and sometimes it is, and I've used it in reverse, is I think, well, it's their karma to take responsibility for this. Or if there's a difference of opinion, actually think if I've ever actually used this, but I've thought it. Well, even if I'm wrong, it's my karma. I'm the one who has to do it. Kirtani once said, it's not just a question of what God wants, it's who he wants it from. And so in that respect, the one who has the position, we need to cooperate with the person who has the position, because the position has been given to them because they have a duty, they have a karma, they have a karmic destiny here to have the responsibility and learn from it. When someone came to me, this is one of my all-time favorite life experiences as a leader. He came to me during the early years of Palo Alto when I was pretty much the only voice. And he came to me and he said, many people find you inspiring, but I don't. And I loved my response. I mean, thank you, God. My response was, oh, you poor man. I said, it must be terrible for you because in every event you have to listen to me. And I wasn't faking it. That was just like, this must be awful for you. And he was so shocked by my response. He didn't know what else to say. And we sort of moved on from there. And actually the same person, must have been the same conversation. I can't imagine that there were two. But the same person said to me, just sort of told me all the ways in which I wasn't a good leader. which were all true. And I said, again, it was like, I said, do you think if I knew how to do this job, I would still be doing it? It was like, of course I'm learning. Why else would God be wasting this position on someone who could gain nothing from it? I said, yeah, that's why we all have to work together. And that's why, I mean, and please make this very clear, you are not under obedience to me. That would be like a really terrible thing for both of us, because that's not who I am. I'm just trying to make it work. Going all the way back to the beginning, even great souls like those SRF leaders, you know, we should presume that they're right. We should follow Swami's rules. Swami said he followed Master. Well, he had absolute faith in Master, unhesitatingly, but not unquestioningly. And a leader should expect people to question you, because if you don't create an atmosphere in which people can question you, you have isolated yourself, and the only input you will ever get is from people who agree with you. And that is really dangerous. So I was just reading in the other class I give, one of the others. Swami said we mustn't equate loyalty with agreement, because to merely agree is not necessarily to be loyal. Now, of course, there's ways and ways to present a disagreement. There's loyal ways to present a disagreement. But people need to be able to tell you what they think is true, or else it's not good for them, and it's terrible for you. Just terrible. Swamiji said he felt that that's really what happened to Diamanta. That loyalty became defined as agreeing with her, and then once he was expelled, loyalty became defined as being against Kriyananda. And as Swami wrote to her himself, he said, no one dares defend me, because to do so is to be deemed out of tune immediately and to be ostracized from SRF. So as a consequence, not only does no one speak for me, but the more you speak against me, the more loyalty has been created about me. And Swami says, and none of it is true. But it all starts from that premise. Yes, Eric?
Yeah, I was just thinking if that exact thing is happening now in the political arena. In some sense, the people that are defending Mr. Trump find themselves in a camp, and the other side finds themselves in a camp. And the one thing that's frustrating to me is you can't make real progress, even if you've got good ideas and good consciousness on your side, if you spend a whole lot of time knocking the other person down, and in this case, perhaps the Democratic side knocking Trump down, even though I disagree with so many things he says, I have to look at who he is at a deeper level, because calling him all these names and frying him and saying he's just the worst thing that ever happened, it's going to take, it's like the expansiveness that could happen now is not going to happen with that kind of attitude, because it's going to come back to bite that party, even if they win. In other words, if Democrats win across the board, there might be something nice, obviously, about, and that tends to be more my way. But if I get there at the cost of beating that other person down and other people down, eventually I will have lost. And
So, Eric, I'm not going to go into politics because it's
no, the reason I say that is because Swami always chose with SRF to say, I disagree with this or that or that, but he always held those people in possibility and in a kind of reverence for who they were at a deeper level. And I think we need to do that even in the political arena.
Well, this is what I'll say about that. And everybody has to make their own decision. I don't see. Let me try to think about this. Let me think of how to say this exactly. Politics are less important than they appear to be, because the politics and the leadership of any country is simply the karma of the country. And that karma is not determined by the politicians. The politicians emerge because of the karma of the country. And the karma of the country is determined on a much more subtle level than who's in charge and who's elected. You know, none of the people in positions of power are actually creating the destiny of the country or the planet, because and this is the in the path. In the last chapters of the path, Swami talks about, you know, spiritual leaders, spiritual nations, how he says it explicitly, far more than politicians and prime ministers and presidents. It is these great masters who are running the planet. Master in autobiography talks about Jesus and Babaji together have planned the salvation of this age, and they're very concerned about religious bigotry and race hatred and warfare and all of the things that are tearing our world apart. And they have planned the salvation, and the salvation of it is self-realization as a principle, not self-realization fellowship church, but the principle that of the consciousness that comes to people when we realize our unity. Now, the people who are out there, this is my point of view, all the politicians, some of them are they are all different shades of gray. And some of them are less or more gray than others. And it depends on who you are, who you think is less or more gray. But let's just say that some of them are less or more gray, but none of them are operating from the premises from which this world is really run. I think those who believe in God are a little better. And, you know, we can go on a whole lot of other things are a little better, but none of them are actually operating on our premises. So there's no way you can walk into that world and tell them to operate on our premises. They can be moving a little more toward them. You know, like I like people who have a religious bent rather than pure materialism, but even sometimes the religious bent is so twisted that we're not relating. So the principle is self-realization. The good news is they're not in charge. The good news is that they are actors on a stage, and the only question, and I think it's well, let me phrase it differently. That's not true. Each of us has to contribute in the way that we feel we can be most useful and are called by God to contribute. But to walk up to someone who is in the fourth grade morally and spiritually and try to enlist them in a graduate course in Dharma, it's like, why would you even do that? You would ask them to be slightly less terrible in the way that they're in what they're doing, but these people are not interested, capable of understanding, but the good news is they're not in charge. And so those of us who actually know who is in charge, as Joe said when the whole pandemic started and the whole world was turned upside down in 3 days, he said only Babaji could do that. No government, no human being could do it. Only Babaji could flip the whole planet in a matter of days. And, you know, I've repeated that to myself many times. When involved, when confronted with other people's realities, but you have to ask yourself, you know, if he's 4 years old, what is appropriate? What is the next step for a 4-year-old? You cannot expect him to move into our world. None of those people, I don't think, are going to hear what I have to say. It's not my world. I've actually, in this case, because it looks really dramatic what's going on right now, I think the only thing people can do is vote. And that's sort of like, I finally found a position for the next 70 days, which is people really need to vote because who gets elected is going to be the karma of the country. And so if people have an interest in the karma of the country, the one physical action we can take, I think, is to vote. But the real action we can take is to support Babaji and Christ in their plan for the salvation of this earth, which everything is run from the causal level. It's run from vibrations. And like Mother Mary in Medjugorje told the children, that these certain cataclysmic things were going to happen. I think there were like 9 or 10 or something like that. I'm not going to get the details correctly. But the main point is one of them, she said, has already been averted because people responded to her call to love God and to pray. Now, that's pretty impressive. And that has nothing to do with who's going to be elected. Who's going to be elected is whether or not we pray. And it's not that we pray for who's going to be elected. It's that we cooperate with Babaji and Jesus for the salvation of this world. And then that begins to shift the karma. And I don't know what the karma of the country is. I don't know. It's very interesting because both sides of the political spectrum right now have the same message. And the message is cataclysm if we lose and they win. They've defined the cataclysm differently, but it's really fascinating. It's like we're not, we're briefly talking about Medicare or something like that, but we're really talking, both sides are talking cataclysm, which, stand back and say, wow, isn't this interesting? And the players are trivial compared to the flow of energy. And I think for myself, it's better not to get too involved in the details because from a self-realization point of view, it'll never make sense. You can't put a whole bunch of pineapples into the room. Did I talk to you since someone said to me, well, this is about COVID-19, but it is about if COVID-19 were a math problem. If COVID-19 were a math problem, a word math problem, this is what it would be. We're all floating down the river at 3 miles an hour. A wheel falls off the canoe. How much pancake batter will it take to reshingle our roofs? And so, especially the last line of that, every time I try to figure something out, I realize I'm trying to figure out how much pancake batter I'm going to need to reshingle my roof. And it occurs to me that there's just no way to answer the question. However, I pay attention to world events. And yesterday I decided to just, if I'm going to say anything, I'm going to say, the karma of the country will be determined. And the tangible manifestation of that right now is voting. The greater manifestation of that is our consciousness. Period. Let's have a chant. I see Supriya's already at her harmonium. Let's pause with the chant and let's put our consciousness back there.